Hello, Symposius. I'm Dr. Angela Puca, a university lecturer and a religious studies PhD, and this is your online resource for the academic study of magic, esotericism, paganism, shamanism, and all things occult. So today we have a special guest on the channel, and I'd like to bring him on now. Hello, Stephen. Today we have Stephen Skinner with us. You're very known among the community of esoteric practitioners and scholars. So I'm very pleased to have you here. Thank you for being on my channel.
And thank you for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to talk to somebody who's interested in these things.
Yes, absolutely. So probably, as I said, most people that follow me are familiar with your work, but would you mind introducing yourself just in case there's anybody that doesn't know you or your work?
Oh, okay, that's a bit difficult. I've done quite a few things in my life. I started as a geography lecturer, and I got involved with magic, and maybe later I can tell you some of the reasons why I got involved. And I also went and lived in Singapore and Malaysia and studied Feng Shui. And I don't mean the sort of simplistic Feng Shui practice in the West, but stuff that depends upon Chinese astrology and is very detailed. In the course of doing that, I met with some Chinese magicians, and they filled in some of the gaps in my knowledge, because they just took it as something that you do, not something that you study. And where I lived in Johor, around the corner, there was a shop which had a signboard up which said magician in various different ways. There was a group of sigils which are out of one of the grimoires I recognized. There was the local term bomo and a few other things. And I got to chat to this guy, and as we talked through, I saw some of the gaps in grimoire magic which made a difference. And so I brought that knowledge back with me. I lived in Asia for about 20 years, and in the course of doing that, I organized some of my books to be printed out there, which has been a good thing and a bad thing. And then 3 years ago, I came back to London, and subsequently worked on, I don't know how many grimoires, 20 or 30, many grimoires, because it was fun unpicking them and then testing them to see if they work. And then some grimoires that I tested and I've discarded, and so I didn't publish. But the ones that I published, I have tested and had interesting results from them. So that's me, an author, a lecturer, but basically somebody who's most interested in practical magic.
Yeah, you are, correct me if I'm wrong, but you like the label of scholar practitioner, and combining both the scholarly study and practicing what you study, which
Yes.
which makes me wonder, how do you test the grimoire? So how does the process of you selecting a grimoire and working on it works? Because as you mentioned, it tends to be also based on the efficacy that you derive out of them. So how does the process work? And how did you start as well to get into esotericism and the grimoires specifically?
Okay. So one of the things I sort of forgot to mention is that later in life, I did my doctorate in classics, which meant brushing up my school Latin and then learning Koine Greek, and also Hebrew, and so on. So that forced me to read the original languages of the various grimoires, which was painful but a good discipline. And as a result of that, I did 2 books, one on the history of Solomonic magic, and then follow through one. The one that started it was the Greco-Egyptian magic, which I realized is the root of a lot of stuff that's in the grimoires. So I initially tried to do a complete survey from the beginning of magic till the 20th century, and my supervisor told me that was completely crazy. Well, yeah, from your smile, I can tell that you understand.
Yes.
And so I backed off a bit, and finally I finished my degree, having written a lot more words than I'd originally intended to do, so that I have, and read an awful lot of academic stuff on magic, so that I have two viewpoints. My initial one, whereas as a 16-year-old kid, I thought, wouldn't it be fabulous if some of these things actually worked rather than just being stories? And then the other attitude was, viewpoint was, having read a large amount of the academic material on magic, so I can feel very critical of stuff as well. But in the end, what got me going was that some of the experiments I did, not all of them, but some of them, worked, and they worked in the most extraordinary ways. For example, can I give you a few examples?
Yeah, of course. I was about to ask if you felt comfortable sharing those examples. I'm sure that
Yes.
people will be all over it.
Well, yeah, one or two I've told before, and one or two are completely new. But back, well, it would be about 40 years ago, more than that, 45 years ago, I lived in Bath in Somerset, and a friend, a very clever friend, managed to get a rental of the castle nearby, and it really was. I mean, it was a built of stone and huge and surrounded by forest and so forth. And we thought, hey, that's an excellent place to do magic in. Let's go and experiment. So I did. We turned up late one night and did a evocation out of the Goetia, because of course it's probably true to say that most people start with the Goetia because it was published and easily available, but it's still not a bad grimoire. And I'm not going to tell you which spirit, but we picked a spirit who has connections to birds, one way or the other. And what we wanted was, we wanted material, we wanted to see it, we wanted it to manifest. And it was obviously decided it wasn't going to manifest in quite the way we wanted to. So when we reached the peak of the ritual, suddenly there was a lot of noise on the roof above. And I thought, what the hell is that? And it was birds. And we're now talking about 1 o'clock in the morning, at 1 o'clock at night, where you don't expect birds to be awake. And this noise increased and increased, and then finally they started coming down the chimney, because it was one of these huge open fireplaces that you see in castles, and started streaking around the room. And I thought, well, wow, this demon has definitely stirred up the local bird community, although maybe it's a fantasy that we're having, and we're not sure whether it's real or not. But they were flying around the circle, and I won't tell you, we got a conclusion, but that's a separate conversation. In the morning, when we went in to clear up, we noticed that there was bird shit on the floor, which there hadn't been before, because we'd cleaned the area almost clinically, trying to be very good and obey the rules. But the most interesting thing was that the circle, which was still laying there, had not been shat upon, but the bird shit was around the outside of it in a circle, with no damage on the circle itself. So that was the point where I figured, well, magical circles do have a benefit. Maybe it's only just keeping out birds, whether they were real or imaginary, it doesn't matter. And they must have been real, because they created the damage on the floor. So that was an early experience I had, which made me think, okay, this stuff works. Not always, but it does, and it has physical results. I didn't intend originally to disturb the local bird community, but that's what we did. That's the end of
And
that
what
story.
about the other? What about the other stories? You said you have more than one.
Oh, okay. So this one I have told in other interviews and things online, but it was the one that really convinced me that these things do work. And I've had a number of failures as well, but this particular one, there were four of us, and one of the four of us, this was back in the 1960s, was a joker. He just thought he was so funny, but we took him on board anyway. And so the four of us did the complete Tapsasaras ritual, which Crowley published in the Equinox. It wasn't Crowley's work, it was stuff from the Golden Dawn. And he's a mercurial spirit, so we thought that we could achieve, get access to grimoires that we didn't have. That was the objective. So we did it, and after an hour and a half, we reached the climax. And this guy, I'll tell you who he was. It was Neville Drury. He's not with us anymore, but with his sense of humor, instead of completing his part of the ritual, actually started calling on, well, it was a real person, Alice Bailey. Now, you've probably read Alice Bailey. She was an early theosophist. She's possibly, you could consider her as boring, but I think possibly you could with a smile like that.
Possibly, yes.
And so Neville Drury thought, well, what I'm going to do is invoke Alice Bailey. And this was not what we were supposed to be doing. So I was really quite annoyed when he started chanting, Alice Bailey, Alice Bailey. And I thought, oh, for heaven's sake. Anyway, so we closed down. I thought, well, okay, you've ruined this ritual. Now, we were actually doing it in a sound studio because we wanted to record it inside of the university, one of the universities in Australia. I'm not going to mention the university because this may cause other problems. But so we were a bit annoyed about that, and so we broke up for the night and went back to our respective homes. But in the morning, I got an urgent phone call from the guy who's responsible for the studio and who had given us permission to do it in the studio, which was a bit naughty of him. We probably left a lot of incense smell there, but never mind. And he said, something really weird has happened. A guy has turned up with a station wagon, and it's full of cardboard boxes, and in the boxes are books. And the library, which was next to where we were doing the operation, he wishes to donate his complete collection of the works of Alice Bailey. And he unloads these books, and there's Alice Bailey in every language that she ever published in every single edition. And the librarian came out, or somebody came out and said, no, we don't want that. And this guy said, well, I am donating it, and here you are. And so he unloaded everything on the pavement in front of the library, got in his car and drove off. And that was the last anyone saw of him. But as a piece of weirdness, that takes some beating. And the message from that I got is that the actual climax of the ritual, when you express what it is you wanted, he'd reached that point, and then Neville had damaged our real objective. But we had physical proof. There was so many hundred copies of every edition of Alice Bailey. I don't know what the library did with them, but the last I saw, they were sitting on the pavement outside. So that made me think, right, there's something in this, and it's just more than psychological. So that's my second story.
What do you think that makes magic effective, and how do you think that magic works? You know, because sometimes you try to summon something and it's not exactly things don't manifest exactly the way that you expect them, as you also mentioned. So
Yeah,
I
I
guess
mean,
I have the two questions of what do you think that makes magic effective, and um, what do you how do you think that magic manifests, if there is a specific process of manifestation?
okay, so first of all, I don't think that magic is psychological. I think that it's definitely objective. I think that magic relies upon other entities, and we've called them spirits or demons or whatever. And that when you use those words, modern people and academics sort of pull back from that. They don't like that idea. But whatever it is, whatever the label is, there are some kind of independent entities which you can, if you get the formula right, command, and they will do things which make changes in the physical world. That's, in my opinion, how magic works. And
So do you think that it only works by summoning spirits? What about forms of natural magic or sympathetic magic? Do you think that that is not effective?
no. These are labels for the way of approaching it. I mean, natural magic. You can define for me natural magic before I make the comment.
Yes.
What is natural? What is natural magic?
Well, it's been defined in many ways, but I'm thinking, for instance, about Giovan Battista della Porta, who's an Italian esotericist, and he wrote Magia Naturalis, Sive de Miracolo Rerum Naturalium, which is something that I've studied for my master's. And so for him, magic, natural magic, I'm now going through Latin, Italian, and English in my head. So natural magic is a way of leveraging the properties of nature, as opposed to summoning entities or contacting spirits. Because especially in the Italian Renaissance, there was this debate between what was the licit form of magic and what wasn't a licit form of magic. And one of the arguments that was proposed was that magic that involves entities was illicit, and magic that would only leverage the learning and applying the hidden book of nature, as it was called, that was licit. So it was more about, in some cases, it was really much, it was really using herbs and concoctions. In other cases, it was also using sympathetic magic, like using the law of similarity, what Fraser later called the law of similarity. So things resemble each other, so they can leverage each other. Like a walnut that resembles a brain can be used in a ritual spell to affect somebody's brain, for instance. And the law of contagion, which is that if things have been in contact, they retain some kind of link to the person. So, for instance, hair or nails or things that have been worn. So these would be all principles that are used in what has been called by some natural magic in a way that doesn't necessarily require the involvement of entities.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Natural magic is not the same as spiritual magic or demonic magic or whatever. And yes, some things can be done by applying natural rules. It's almost an early science, but that is in a separate box, as it were, from the sort of magic that employs discarnate entities to do things in the physical world which you just don't expect could ever happen or would be a reasonable expectation. So yes, it's just slightly unfortunate that both of these categories have got the word magic at the end, because I don't think they're very, very directly related. Yeah, and I've seen examples of natural magic working quite efficiently. And
so even without the involvement of spirits, then?
Well, then you've got to ask, was there an indirect involvement of spirits who've seen you putting these together and decided, you created a wax dummy of somebody and stuck pins in it, whether they then took that image and perpetrated the same damage on the person you baptized the dummy as, that's another question. So it could be two different ways of doing things, or it could be that the natural magic has been activated, has activated some kind of supernatural entity to do the actual effect.
Yeah, I suppose that it also depends on the framework and the belief system that we work with, because from an animistic point of view, everything has a spirit, and everything in a way is an entity in and of itself, even something that as human beings we may consider inanimate. So in that sense, even natural magic, it has to do with involving entities of some sort.
Fortunately, these days we don't have the theological problems that they did in the Middle Ages. There is not the necessity to go on one side, natural magic, that's safe, that's okay, that's approved by the church. On the other side is, what do we call it, unnatural or spiritual magic, which is definitely condemned by the church. I'm very glad that I live in the 20th and 21st century rather than, say, the 14th century. Although if you had the power, then maybe that's not a problem.
So you said that magic works, not always, but it does work. So is there, I suppose I'm trying to figure out, in your opinion and in your experience, whether there are some elements that make magic more effective, like that increase your likelihood of the ritual that you're doing to be effective, as opposed to falling into the category of it's not going to work. Have you seen certain patterns? When does it work and when it doesn't work? So what happens when it doesn't work and what happens when it does work?
Yeah, definitely. Because let me see. If you do it wrong, for example, if you're going to burn a particular incense to attract a particular variety of a particular spirit, and you don't, but you burn something very stinky instead, then they won't come. Because, as you know from Egyptian temples, etc., bad smells are excluded. People who've eaten garlic are not admitted to ancient Egyptian temples and so forth. So you do the wrong smell, they won't come. You face in the wrong direction, in some cases they won't come. And so I have gone and tracked down these many things and built a framework, which is why now mostly I have success rather than failure. But there is always still some failure, and you just think, even with a physical science, there will always be failures. So, for example, my father-in-law was a professor of chemistry, and he was quite happy to say that sometimes, say 10%, the chemical reaction doesn't go right because there was an impurity in the test tube, or the temperature was wrong, or the speed of the operation was wrong. And so if physical science can have all of these reasons for not working, then I think magic can also have these reasons. And I've cataloged them as I've come across them. Magic is quite directional and quite time related. So if you wanted to call a particular spirit who is normally associated with the third hour of the day, but you didn't, you called him in the middle of the night, he just won't come. And the only parallel I can put to that is if you call up your doctor at 3 a.m. and demand to be seen immediately, you won't get a result. So timing is important. Direction is important. If you go to the wrong shop, you won't be able to buy what it is you wanted to buy. And the spirits are quite consistent about that. If you have all of the facts, and that's one of the difficulties of grimoires, not every grimoire has all of the facts, and in fact a lot of them are deficient. So when we get around to talking about the Summa Sacra Magica, I was going to say that it has quite a good definition of magic. Shall I read it?
Yeah, sure.
It has quite a good definition of magic, and it has a lot of stuff which later grimoires do not. So its definition, which is right at the first book in the first treatise, in the first chapter, it says magic is the science of restraining evil and benevolent spirits by the name of God and by their own names and by the names of otherworldly things. Whence it follows that the knowledge of words is magical, because every name is a word, since a word is everything that can be uttered by the tongue and written in letters. And it goes on from there. But basically, it says that magic is basically verbal. And there's a lot of truth in that. If you say the wrong things, it won't manifest, it won't come. So you've got to have the time right, the direction right, and what you're saying right. But that wasn't what you were asking. You were asking why doesn't it work sometimes? And the answer is by failing to do all of these things correctly. And you'd expect the same with chemistry. If you use lead rather than tin, and you put it in nitric acid rather than sulfuric acid, you get a completely different result. You probably gas yourself, in fact, on that one. But,
Yes. I was wondering, do you think that this only applies to the spirits that are mentioned in grimoires that might be more susceptible to very specific ways of being summoned? Or do you think that it applies to all spirits and entities in general? Because there are people that, there are practitioners that talk about, engaging with entities of different kinds in ways that are much less structured and more instinctual.
yeah. Well, basically, I'm a guy, and therefore I'm not very instinctual. So I am rule-based. But in the groups that I worked with, there was one girl who was not so structural, but she used to successfully go out on various nights of the year into the forest behind and call spirits who were, as it were, nameless until she'd asked them their name. And that was very successful. So I've never, ever said, you've got to do it the grimoire way or it won't work. No, there are a number of ways of doing it. I still maintain basically that a lot of it depends upon these entities, but how you contact them is a more personalized thing. Some people take the attitude that you should cozy up to them and be nice to them. I take the same attitude to spirits as I might do to training a horse or a dog, that you do have to be strict and you do have to limit it. The horse can go round the circle on the end of a rope, or the dog can go fetch a ball, but it can't do lots of other things and shouldn't be encouraged. So, yeah. There are many ways to do this, and in fact, even religion, in some ways, is successful in calling upon certain entities, but I don't think we should go there. That becomes a very long conversation.
Well, you can if you want, but I wouldn't mind.
Well, just deflecting that, my wife is a Hindu girl, and so I've seen many things in the temples in India, which, in my view, can only have happened because of spiritual entities working behind the scenes. But that's another thing. Christianity is a little bit harder to pin down because a lot of its essence, I think, has been drained out of it. Protestant Christianity is not nearly as No, I'm not going to go there. That's going to get me into trouble.
That's okay. So you said that you're about to publish the Summa Sacrae Magick. So do you want to talk about that more specifically about this grimoire and how does it differ from the others you worked on?
Yeah. That's it. And it's printed. And it contains a lot of material. There are 5 books in Summa Sacra. I have published just the first 2. And if anyone buys a copy, then I suggest you read the second one first and then the first one after that. Just because the first one has got a huge number of names and words and things. The second one is more approachable. And the second one has tools like the table. Now, the thing about Summa Sacra Magick is that a lot of stuff that appeared later was derived from it. So, for example, John Dee's table for conjuring spirits or angels, and I don't see very much difference between those two, was actually a copy from Summa Sacra. And so a lot of the modern Enochian material is also indirectly derived from the Summa Sacra. Let me see what else.
And what are the characteristics of this grimoire?
Well, it also is not shy about demons, and it gives the hierarchy, and it also gives the sort of layout of Tartarus with the thrones, which actually tells you the correct directions to invoke in, or evoke, if you like. It has an early pentagram, which is quite detailed, and its table of practice, which is quite extraordinary, actually shows that it's been derived from 4 different cultural settings. So a lot of it's in Latin, some of it's in Greek, some of it's in Hebrew, and some of it's even in Arabic. And these 4 languages have their complete alphabets at the sides of the table. So there's a Latin 20-odd characters, there's Greek characters, there's Hebrew characters, and there's Arabic characters. What else? Yeah, and then inside the table itself there are angels which are drawn from all 4 of those cultural groups. So very strangely, it actually pulls a lot together. And but the history of this manuscript is very large. It's in fact, when I first thought about doing this, I thought, oh, I'll just publish the whole manuscript. And then I started working on it and realizing that getting just 2 books out was a lot of work, and I'm working on the 3rd and 4th book now. And these are in...
I think you also mentioned this, that it has more of a scientific structure.
Yes, it does. So it divides time into seasons, and by very specifically divides it, even giving the date of the month and the day on which the seasons change. It divides the angels into 7 or 10 different heavens. So it's very structured. So that's what pleases me. But it also answers a lot of questions about, well, where does this angel belong? Who is Aniel? What is Aniel's qualities, and so on. And then it goes back a little bit further because it talks about the winds. And this reminded me that when I was in Athens, I saw a temple of the winds, which stands in the middle of a large area, fairly desolate, but it's been untouched and not demolished. Everything else around it has been demolished. And according to the Summa Sacra, there are 40 winds. And the winds carry the spirits. So if the spirits are thousands of miles away or thousands of 20 heavens away, the winds will bring them. So it gives invocations for the winds. And experimentally, one of my colleagues tried this, and he realized that if he called the wind first and then the spirit, it came much, much more quickly, which is gratifying. It's almost as if the spirits use the winds as their transport. But anyway, so this is something that occurs in no other grimoires. And I'm surprised. Can you remember any grimoire which personalizes or talks about the winds? No, I certainly can't. And it gives 40 winds. And it gives evocations for each of the winds to be followed by the spirits that they carry. And there's a lot of detail like that, which I can't really go into. And it's not shy. It talks about Satan and Beelzebub. And by the time the grimoires have been Christianized, the top trilogy of demons have been cut out, because if in the 1300s you're wandering around with a book with those names in it, you ran a serious risk from the Inquisition or even from the local church. So I'm surprised that the Summa Sacrae actually survived, but it seems to have been passed down in a fairly strongly held, not published. So I'm doing what it hasn't done for the last 700 years, and maybe I won't be loved for that. But
why?
Well, okay, so the attempts to publish this manuscript have many times been stopped, not by the Inquisition, not by the Church. I'll tell you some examples. So, for example, the first magician who I know owned it was Trithemius, the abbot of Spanheim, who's written much other stuff on magic. I published his Stegonographia, where I was lucky to find all 4 volumes in one manuscript, and so I published that. So he owned the Summa Sacra, and then when his library in Spanheim was sold up, John Dee managed to buy it. So and Dee took a lot of material out of it, and then Dee ran out of money. And as he was passing through Hesse-Kassel, he sold the Summa Sacra, which must have broken his heart, would have broken mine, to the local ruler, who put it in the Hesse-Kassel library, and it sat there ever since. So, thank God that has preserved it, because if it had been just circulated around, it might well have been burned. Burning manuscripts was even more popular than burning witches. And then in 2007, Damaris Gare transcribed all of it in Latin. And then she was going to publish that, and it didn't get published. And then the Warburg in London and the university in, I think, Bern were going to publish it as a joint edition, and that was well advertised, and that failed to happen. And several other people have attempted to publish it and failed to happen. So finally I thought, well, I don't want it to go just back on library shelves. I'm going to publish it. It was just really my attitude to these things rather than common sense. My wife said, no, you shouldn't publish this. Nobody else has succeeded. Why are you trying? And I believe that, there's a lot of useful information in here. Of course, either as an academic study or as a practice. So I did. And we've all heard, for example, about King Solomon's rings, but nobody knows what they're like. this manuscript has detailed descriptions of 4 rings and how they should be made, etc., etc. And no, I haven't got round to doing that, but I think I probably will. It's always good to test these things out. At least that's my attitude. And then towards the end of the second volume, there are the 10 Kandaris, which are talismans, which have not really made it into any other grimoire. And they're quite extraordinary. They're actually made up of letters drawn from the 4 different alphabets that I mentioned earlier. And so in building them out of these letters, it is very much like Osman Spare's talismans, which he built up out of words that have been added, all the letters added together, and then the duplicates all eliminated, and then the words modified in other ways. So I was surprised to see that the Summa Sacrae was showing that sort of procedure. Of course, the Kandaria have not really been seen until very recently. I know some academics have picked them out and used them, but so I published all of them. And
that's great. You have published so many grimoires, which makes me wonder, given you have studied and published translations of so many grimoires, do you find that there are certain consistent patterns in terms of the cosmology, the specific hierarchy of demons and spirits? Do you think that there is overall a consistent pattern, or do you think that it varies too much to identify a specific pattern of cosmology and hierarchy of spirit?
I definitely do think there's a consistent pattern. If they're part of nature and part of reality, then I'm not surprised. Yeah. But what you have is a distinct hierarchy. And the distinct hierarchy is important for practice, because if you're evoking a spirit, a lowly spirit, and it's always good to start with lowly spirits. These people who say, "Oh, I'm going to invoke Satan or somebody," that's just rubbish. You can't do it early on, or even later on. You threaten them by the next level of angels or demons above them. And in fact, a more complete operation is to start at the top of the pile with God, and then work your way down through archangels, angels, spirits, demons, blah, 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 right the way down to the end. And why does that work? Well, I used to be for a couple of years a school teacher, and I remembered very clearly that the best threat always for a child who's mucking up is, "I will send you to the headmaster's study." And occasionally I actually had to do that, but that worked very effectively. And after that, I didn't have any more trouble. And so in the grimoires, you threaten the spirit that you're trying to control with somebody in the hierarchy above them. So there's 2 things here. Yes, I do believe the hierarchy exists as part of cosmology. And yes, I do believe it has a practical purpose, at least from my point of view. And I think a lot of things are hierarchical. For example, when I was a kid, I found, I don't know if it was Linnaeus or some other writer, but there was an entire hierarchy of all the different animals and plants in the universe. And this is something the Victorians used to like to do. I mean, the guy probably spent his entire life doing it, but I was impressed. And so when it appeared to me that spirits also had a hierarchy, I didn't find that difficult at all.
And you said and mentioned also in the definition of magic from the Summa Sacrae that God is at the top of this hierarchy. So what obviously, I assume that what is meant there by God is the Christian God. But do you think that at the top of the hierarchy is a God that is conceptualized the way that Christians do, or do you have a different conceptualization of God in the hierarchy of spirits when it comes to the practical side? Because obviously, grimoires have been written at a specific time, so they are also syncretized with the religion of the time. But from a practical point of view, and from your point of view, what do they mean by God? What is that God that they talk about at the top of the hierarchy?
Okay, so there are many gods out there. Because a lot of these grimoires are written in Europe, they came under Christianity, and they're written by people who were probably practicing Christians. Not so much now. So Christianity is not taken quite so seriously. I've lost my track. What were we talking about?
What is God? What is the
What is
God
God?
that they
Oh,
talk about?
you're asking the most difficult question
Yeah,
of
of
all.
course. I'm here to do that, to ask
Well,
difficult questions.
I don't know what is God, but I am happy to pick up on his hierarchy. And whether it's, I mean, if you look at again, I'll go back to Summa Sacra. On the four corners, you have Deus, which is God in Latin. You have Theos, which is God in Greek. You have Elyon, which is God in Hebrew, and there's Allah even on this table, which is God in Arabic. So we're not picking on a particular God. There's a whole range there, and then over the top of that, there might be something else, but I don't know about it, and I don't know its name, so I can't call on it. And because magic is bound up with words, because the instructions only happen through words in this form of magic, so you need to have a name somewhere or other. Do I particularly call on the Christian God? No, I don't. But I'm quite happy to call on his archangels and their angels and the spirits under them and so on down the tree. So that's just practical. As we're not talking about religion, that's another thing. But
Yeah, but sorry if I interrupt, but I was thinking, so I'm trying to understand it from a phenomenological point of view, if you will, in the sense that this hierarchy means that the entity above is in charge of the entity below, right?
yeah,
So in a practical sense, God here would be the one who's in charge of everybody.
yeah,
So it might or might not be the creator, because I'm just obviously that is metaphysical and religious speculations. But in terms of the practical side of the hierarchy and how to use it, God in that sense is the entity that is in charge of all the ones that are below it. Is that correct in your view?
yeah, I would think so. But do you put a name on that? And then you get stuck in all sorts of Gnostic speculations as to whether the real God is still in charge, or whether the creator God is a lesser entity. I forget what's the Greek term for the creator God. Anyway, yeah, I mean, you're asking very big questions here from a
Well, I'm
practical
just
point of
I'm
from a
just curious because
yeah, I mean, if you're asking my practice, no, I start a little bit lower down the hierarchy than God. But a lot of these magicians would, like John Dee, would have spent a couple of hours praying first and then proceeding from there. But as you know, Dee's angels lied to him quite a lot, so they were probably not as angelic as he had hoped. So even by lots of prayers beforehand, they couldn't. They still weren't that good. I suppose I'm not really concerned with good and evil. I'm more interested in, does it work or does it not work, which is more of a low-level question.
Yeah, that makes sense. And also, you said that people can't really invoke Satan directly, for instance. So, what do you think that it happens when people try to do that? Do you think that is not effective, or do you think that is effective but dangerous?
Well, I think if you try for some entity at that level and you do it correctly, then that's dangerous. But I don't think very many people can or do. I certainly haven't. The farthest up the tree I have worked, I invoked Paimon on one occasion, and I lived in a village in France at the time, and I did it at the end of 1999, literally on the change of one century to the next. And so I thought I had the right to call on one of the kings. And the result was a disaster because that night, and I can show you newspaper reports of it, the largest storm that had ever happened in France happened in that, it's based around that area, around Saint-Lô. 20 square meters of roof were ripped off my house, and 2 or 3 of the largest trees were felled outside. Now, this you can easily say is coincidence. It just happened that one night when I was invoking, a storm turned up. Well, that's true, and I'll accept that's possible. But I rather suspect it wasn't. I rather suspect it was a result of me not quite doing it right. And I certainly wouldn't have tried anything higher than that. Beelzebub, Satan, I don't think so. And I don't think it's sensible for anyone to try unless they're rather expert. And magic is not a subject that you can get experts in yet, because as a connected study in the West, it doesn't exist. You have chemistry, for example, had all sorts of weird things. And then come the 1800s, it settled down and people identified the elements, and then they recorded particular operations that produced color, or and so it worked. So that is a subject that has developed, and now it's quite complicated. Likewise, medicine has also hasn't got to the end. There's still lots of things it doesn't know, but it's managed to establish a system, a routine. Unfortunately, magic hasn't got to that sort of level yet. I think it's still a very experimental science, and that's something I want to not correct, but improve.
And so, in your experience, since you also practice the grimoire material to work on, is there one grimoire that has revealed to be the most effective, the one that has garnered the most results from a magical point of view?
No, I'm not going to answer that question.
Okay.
I will stay and say instead that, like most people, I started with a Goetia, and the Goetic spirits are still quite effective. But then a number of other grimoires after that, like for angels, the Almadel is very effective. It's also relatively safe and works. Key of Solomon, definitely. No, I can just keep on listing them, but there are one or two, like the ones with strange names, which are Germanic, which never worked for me particularly well. Throw out a few names.
And I was thinking, and this is a question from a practical point of view, from an experiential point of view, as opposed to from a theological point of view. So what is the difference between angels and demons in terms of, the nature has it manifest, not from a theological point of view, from the Christian or some other religious point of view, but from your experiential point of view? What's the difference between angels and demons, or indeed other spirits?
Not very much. It's a useful division, and but effectively you get angels like the ones that Dee thought he called, or that he did call, which tell lies and are not very good, and you get bad angels. Probably don't get good demons, but effective demons, or ones that will actually take your orders and do them, they exist, and so they could be considered good demons. But well, Christianity is, and Judaism, I suppose, also has talked about the demonic forces being the angels that left heaven and came down to earth to copulate with human females and things like that. But that's theology, so we're not talking theology here. So there's not much difference. They're no easier to see, angels or demons. They're no easier to command, angels or demons. What their morals are is another question, but they are both unseen until you can manage to get a full manifestation, and therefore they're equally difficult to deal with in some ways. So the short answer is not much.
Is there a particular reason a practitioner might want to deal with one or the other?
Yeah, sure. I mean, of all the entities that you could deal with, the ones in the grimoires are quite often given a particular office. The office is the description of what they're capable of doing. So if one spirit has an office which consists of curing, curing some disease, then they're not the spirit to ask for a new girlfriend. If there's some spirit which is capable of conniving with you to affect other human beings to do things you want, like in a court case, then they're not going to be any good for curing disease. So there is, and the angels is similarly so, although they've got a much broader spectrum. So it's the office of the angel that is important.
Thank you. And do you think there are specific dangers of working with entities of any sort, both angels and demons, and how can practitioners avoid these dangers?
Yeah, okay. Well, you should not just dive in. You should take all the precautions. And the basic precaution is, let's just talk Solomonic for the moment, is a floor circle which is properly consecrated so that any entity can't cross it. And I am convinced that a properly constructed floor circle is indeed a protection for the people working from inside. Then you should make sure that you have the right preparations and you come down the hierarchy from up high to the particular entity you want to affect or control or talk to or whatever. That your directions are correct, that you're facing it. You don't want to have your back to a spirit that's about to arrive, because it will not like that at all. And you probably think it a bit strange that I attribute feelings to spirits, but I do think they do have. So if you do all of these and do not step out of the circle until you've banished and so forth, then no harm will come. But if
not even in return of the things you ask, the reason because there are some practitioners that are concerned about having to pay a specific price for asking some things to demons, angels, and entities in general.
Sorry, I don't think I get quite the essence of that question.
I suppose whether there could be some kind of backlash or price to pay or consequence after the ritual is done and over and the thing has been achieved.
Yes, if you consulted your local priest, he would tell you there's definitely a backlash from dealing with these entities.
Well, no, I don't mean from a theological point of view going to hell or something like that. I mean, like practically, I'm
then
in terms of
also,
what happens to the person.
There's also a mental health issue. People are attracted to magic, and sometimes people who are not that mentally stable get into magic because it seems like a shortcut to whatever it is they wanted. Incidentally, as a side panel to that, magic is definitely not a shortcut. It's much more hard work than going and doing whatever you might have done otherwise. So there will be sometimes there are a number of my acquaintances who are undergoing psychological revivification, having done magic and not done it properly or done it without taking precautions. And you get people who say, well, I don't need all this, I can do it in my head or whatever. And they will sit in their room and call on unnamed creatures. And that's all a bit silly. If it's not done properly, it's like, again, if it was chemistry, if you mixed up sulfur and carbon and I can't remember what the third ingredient of gunpowder is, and just lit it for the hell of it, and I've seen someone do that, then there's damage. So in magic, to go into something without using the proper equipment is just a bit foolish. And can have nasty effects. I don't want to turn people off magic by telling about nasty effects, but yes, there definitely can be nasty effects, but not if it's done carefully. One of the more infamous writers about magic, who was an American, he was actually a scientist, talked about the slingback. I can't remember what his term was. That if the magic didn't achieve its objective, then it would swing back and whack you. And he had many stories about that. I've never personally experienced that, but I don't want to. So yeah, there's a possibility of that. Magic is not it's not kindergarten stuff. You have to be careful and you have to do it thoroughly, and you have to take notice of what you should protect yourself with.
And you mentioned in the beginning that you learned Feng Shui and that it complements in a way the type of magic that you've been working on with the Grimoire tradition of texts that you have worked on. So in what ways does it complement Grimoire magic, if we can call it that?
So one of the reasons why people get into magic is they want to achieve things that are out of their grasp at the moment. And the Chinese equivalent of real Feng Shui enables you to make changes to your environment to attract the things that you want. So there's a certain parallel there, but the formula are quite different. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
No way I can stop people ringing the doorbell. Feng Shui is much more physical. You make physical changes, but it's also very directional, like magic. you line things up, you arrange that you face. I mean, for example, I'm working facing my screen at the moment, but it would be in a direction that I had been relatively sure was good for me. And I do know that if I'm not facing a good direction, that work is harder. And you must have had the same experience. There are just some places where it's like in libraries. I used to look around the Warburg to find a desk which faces in the direction which encourages me to work much more efficiently, as distinct from the ones which were not so. Sorry.
Okay. So yeah, directions are, and this is something that is found in grimoires as well, the importance of directions.
Yes.
So what do you think is the most important, or the most important elements in Feng Shui that complement or maybe are missing in the grimoire tradition?
Let me answer the question you didn't ask. Feng Shui definitely works faster than magic. You can't get the same sort of results, but it's easier to do because the rules are fairly clear if you look at them, and you can just make changes in your environment. So people who want to call a spirit to win a lottery are almost bound to fail, because spirits aren't good at rearranging lottery numbers. That is not one of the things it does, and Feng Shui is not good at that either. But with Feng Shui, you can make it much easier for people offering you a new and better job to contact you. You can make it much easier for the girl that you wanted to date rather than the ones who you have dated to contact you. And so I would recommend that if you only want to go into magic to get a few things fixed, you could fix them faster and easier with Feng Shui, as long as it's real Feng Shui rather than some of the faux Feng Shui that is propagated nowadays. And yes, I use both, but magic still enables you to get things that Feng Shui hasn't even thought of.
Yeah, I get that. And what do you think about practices of magic, such as Chaos Magick, that uses more the psychological model? I know that you said magic is not psychological, but what do you think about the leveraging the psychological model to create changes, in life? I mean, even people that use the psychological model might still believe that magic is real and has very real effects. So I was wondering whether you think that using the psychological model in the ritual practice is completely ineffective, or whether you think there's something to it.
No, you can still do quite good stuff with psychology, and in fact, Chaos Magick is quite interesting because I used to hold meetings in my home when I lived in a much larger house. We used the bottom floor for lectures and things, and so people came. I provided food and drink afterwards, and we had people like Colin Wilson and turning up who were quite well known. And on one occasion, there's so many people came. Fortunately, it was the middle of summer. We had to open the windows and have people sitting outside on the fence listening to the talk. But at one or two of these, the guys who first of all invented Chaos Magick came, and in the conversations afterwards, they went through what they were trying to do. So I won't go into the details, but so I was quite pleased to have heard the initial stirrings of Chaos Magick. But the basic doctrine really is that what is it? No, never mind about the basic doctrine. And
nothing is true, everything is permitted.
Yes, yeah. Well, everybody in the 60s and 70s and 80s liked that idea, and nothing is forbidden. That's great, but that you don't need to use the forms and so forth. So the names, the hierarchies, and things are not so important. Yeah, I get that.
That's why I wondered what you think about that, because Chaos Magick is very anti-hierarchical, and there's also the idea that you can make up your own deities and you can make up your own entities based on the associations that you create. So if to me a specific entity or a specific shape or even a TV show character represents, I don't know, love, for instance, I can use it as a deity in my ritual. I can make up that deity for the purpose of the ritual and then even discard it afterwards. So that's why I was curious to know what you thought.
Yeah, so you're still doing a procedure which produces something, I won't say in the astral, but that has some reality. And so Chaos Magick works. But not every chaos magician is able to work it, and I've never quite figured out why. So yeah, I really don't know much about Chaos Magick. I've heard the initial discussions and things. What do we need all this hierarchy? What do we need all this machinery for? Purely we can just go and think and do it. And so some of those guys really thought out stuff, produced structures in the astral, if you like, and that worked. And this is a separate thing, not the same. That's not an answer you wanted, and it's not a very good answer. So
no, it's a good answer because it's your answer. I wanted your answer. I don't want good answers. I want to, I mean, as you know, I had some questions that I had in mind to ask you, but then I just went off to be, led by my curiosity, because I realized that I just had a lot of questions in my head about things that I want to ask you. And most of the questions were practical, because I think it is fascinating and pretty unique, the fact that you not only work on making grimoires accessible to wider public, but also the fact that you implement them practically. So naturally, that would lead me to be curious about what happened from an experiential point of view. That's why I asked more questions about, from the experiential side as opposed to the theological side. Like, it's not like, for instance, if you say, "Oh, Chaos Magick can work," then it makes me wonder, okay, so the hierarchy of entities is useful for ritualistic purposes, but it might not be ontologically existent, if that makes sense. Like, exist independently of me experiencing it. So it might be something that is useful for the purpose of the practice, and it does work, but it might not be something that is ontologically real in the hard sense of the word, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
I've talked on the channel in the past, and something that I've also published in a recent book, that an academic book that I published on paganism. Scholars are talking about the difference between hard polytheism and soft polytheism, and there's this idea of the different ontologies of spirits. So with hard polytheism, people believe that spirits are ontologically real outside of us. They're just there independently of us interacting with them. And soft polytheism has more of an approach where entities are somewhat dependent on us. They might be seen as archetypes, they might be seen as symbols, they might be seen as forces of nature. They might be seen in different ways, but one of the characteristics is that their existence is somewhat dependent on us, and it is shaped by our interaction, if that makes sense.
Well, actually, that's an interesting point of view. You could then look back and think that the whole hierarchies of gods in every culture have been created by humans, but which is possible, I suppose.
Yes, I was about to say, do you think that the hierarchy of entities and spirit is, from your point of view, obviously, not from the point of view of those who wrote the grimoires, are you more on the soft polytheistic side or the hard polytheistic side, or
No,
neither?
I'm more on the hard polytheistic side. But you could say that's because I don't know how they came about. And one of the things I've been experimenting with is actually asking the spirits, and they're very evasive when you get down to questions like that, which is a bit sad because I was hoping I'd get some concrete information from them. I mean, one of the things I've dug out a number of manuscripts and done the magic, and in some cases it just didn't work at all. So are the names just made up? In which case that would explain it. Or have they all died? If spirits die. Or did I just fail to do it properly? And I'm inclined to think that they're probably been just made up, and therefore they don't come on call because they don't exist. They're just words in the text. And there are a couple of grimoires that are just like that. No, I can't remember the titles, and it's not fair to label
Call them
grimoires
out.
as ineffective. Yes, call them out. Although all of the authors are dead, so it's not personally insulting to anybody.
I have a couple of questions from people. So Realm Castor says, can someone new to magic learn how to use magic from your books?
Yes, definitely. The question is then where to start, because I've now written probably close to 60 books, or edited close to 60 books. My edition of the Goetia actually has some detail at the front, which is quite useful. I've just recently published a Victorian grimoire, which surprisingly is prior to the Golden Dawn, and has a lot of detail in it. I haven't mentioned it on Facebook, I've just put it out there. So yes, there are places to start, and if I had to think where should I start, that's a bit difficult. I know where I want to go next, but I want to look for the sources of the Summa Sacrae. Where did he get his stuff from? An interesting thing about it is that he does list his sources. Tos, the Greek magician, and he says Solomon, but he doesn't mean the king of Israel. He means Solomon, who lived in the 12th century, probably in the same area as he lived, and who wrote a book called Magicae with 6 volumes, and he's obviously been pillaging that book to put in his own book, which is what all authors do, one way or the other, with the exception of testing them. Yeah, sorry, I'm going off on one. Never mind.
Jeremy asked a question that I think I asked you already, which is, can you suggest a specific grimoire that you have found to be the most efficacious? Grimorium Verum, can you share any opinions?
Well, a lot of work was done on the Grimorium Verum. Yeah, the spirits there are as far as I'm concerned, active. Yeah, it's a good place to start.
And thank you for the super chat, Chester, and thank you for moderating the chat, Andrew. So, given that we are approaching the closing of this interview, is there anything that I haven't asked that you'd like to talk about?
Yeah, there's a million things that you haven't asked, some of which I'm very glad
sorry
you didn't
about
ask. No, because you're one of the few people who could ask some of those questions. I was trying to think what you might ask me, and I came up with a large list.
I've never been confrontational with my guests, so.
No, I wasn't being confrontational. but leading us into all sorts of discussions, which
there is something that I know we disagree on. I didn't bring it up. Should I?
Yes,
bring it up?
You should.
So I've heard you talk in interviews about this is something that I've also talked with RENSEP about. I know that we both collaborate with RENSEP, which is the research network for the study of esoteric practices. And both them and, as far as I know, you are fond of the category of the scholar practitioner. And I have the sense that you think less of scholars who are not also practitioners. And personally, even though I don't particularly disclose publicly whether I am a practitioner or not, but I think that regardless of that, if you are a scholar, especially if we talk about an academic scholar, it doesn't really matter if you're a practitioner or not, because when you are doing academic work, you've got to follow a methodology that is quite rigorous and strict, and it has to take into account, and it takes into account whatever biases you have, both if you're a practitioner, not a practitioner, if you have this or that worldview, because everybody has a belief system. So personally, I don't think that in order to be a good academic in esotericism, you necessarily have to be a practitioner.
No,
I think that it's
not.
Okay. But we actually agree on that.
I would agree with you on that, yes. I mean, there's a lot of things that academics can do that people who don't have that training cannot do. And you need to look at the thing from different directions. And there are a lot of practitioners who have got no structure, who are not aware of what other people have done or the history of a subject or anything else like that. And I think that's a great pity. But on the other hand, if you're an academic and you come up with theories, then if magic will ever become a science, and I mean the science in the methodological sense, then these things should be tested. And a lot of academics do not test because, well, frankly, a lot of them do not believe that magic is a practice that can be done. And so that's a pity. But academics still produce a lot of stuff that non-academics are incapable of producing or cannot produce. And so there's definitely a place for both categories of people, but I think there should be more people who embrace both. And I know that's just because I embrace both, and therefore I think everybody else should. But apart from that, it's two different methods of working. And again, going back to chemistry, which is a nice physical thing, my father-in-law, in the end, although he'd been a professor of chemistry, finished up just doing the theory of bonds and things like that, and his conversation became more and more abstract, more and more academic. And I, when did you last touch a test tube? And the answer was a very long time ago. But some of the breakthroughs that he made in creation of plastics have continued to affect our lives since, and it couldn't have been done without the academic attitude or the academic framework. So both things need to be done.
Yeah, I think that in terms of testing things, it also depends on the type of field that the academic is in. So for instance, I'm in religious studies, and more specifically, I do anthropology of religion. So in my case, it's not about testing things. I do field work with people, I participate in rituals, and I study and analyze the way that they construct rituals. So it's not up to an anthropologist to test, for instance, the effectiveness of rituals. It's more about understanding the meaning, understanding the procedures, and understanding the religious framework that is around those practices and how they relate with the way that they see life, the belief system in general. And the same is for a religious studies scholar who is in history of religions. So they would study more the texts and the documents to reconstruct the history of a tradition or the history of a text. So people that are in those kind of fields, they wouldn't be in a position where they can test a magic, even though they might be interested in that.
they don't need to.
Yeah, exactly.
They're busy building up the history, the transmission of ideas from one generation to the next, or from one culture to the next. This is very important stuff, and not needing practice, definitely not. But again, there still needs to be some laboratory bench testing for some people, not for everybody. I don't think practice is essential. I think practice is one way to go, and academia is another way to go, and I am keen on bridging the two, one way or the other.
Yeah, I'm also keen on bridging the two. I think part of my project is to bridge the gap between academia and the community of practitioners, and I know that RENSEP wants to do that as well. So do you think that it is useful to practitioners to engage with academic scholarship in esotericism?
Yeah, I think it's very necessary for them to know the history, though.
Could you please take the microphone closer to your mouth, because I can't hear you very well.
Okay, is that better?
A bit better, yeah. Thank you.
A bit better. Yeah, I think it's very useful. But practitioners don't need to know the history if they're successfully practicing. Academics don't need to test the theories if they can fit them into the cosmology and the history. Well, that's stating the obvious anyway, isn't it?
Yeah, but I think people are still interested in your point of view on these matters.
Okay, well, and thank you for encouraging me to blather on about my point of view. Very
yes.
kind to invite me on your show.
Yes, of course. I think that given your experience is it's a very valuable point of view to bring to the public.
Yep, and magic has been hidden from the public for a long time. Religion has suppressed it successfully until, I don't know, mid-20th century, and the materialistic view also continues to suppress it, because it can only be seen as a sort of quaint practice that primitive tribes did, or that people a long time ago did. But I don't look at it that way.
Agreed. So thank you so much, Stephen. I hope that people will check out your latest book, which is upcoming on the Summa Sacrae Magicae. I'm sure that it's a worth read along with all of your other books. So people definitely check out Dr. Skinner's books. And thank you so much for being here on my channel. I hope that you enjoyed this interview.
I did. Yes, definitely. Okay.
So thank you. Sorry, what were you saying?
Are we finished then?
Yeah. I'm just gonna wrap up in my usual way, and then we can have a chat afterwards. So thank you again, and to all of you guys, I hope that you enjoyed this conversation. And if you did, don't forget to smash the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and activate the notification bell so that you always know when I upload something new or I'm live or anything. I also hope that you consider supporting my work, which is crowdfunded, of bringing academic scholarship to the wider public. And you can do so by joining my Patreon community. I'm sure you're going to love it. It's a fantastic community of like-minded individuals. We just had a great call. We always have a monthly call. And or you can support me on PayPal, Ko-fi. There are many ways that will be listed in the description box, in the bio, in cards, everywhere. So thank you for considering. And thank you so much for being here up until this point. Leave me a comment to know what you thought about this interview. And I really hope that you stay tuned for all the academic fun. Bye for now. Today we hold